Hello and welcome to this tutorial from Escape Studios. Today we're going to be looking at object tracking in 3D Equalizer so that we can try and place a shield on an actor's arm like you might see in the new movie Captain America: A Civil War. Okay, so let's jump into 3D Equalizer. So this shot has already had the camera solved because this is a tutorial on object tracking and not camera tracking. So this is the point where we're going to start from. What I'm going to try and do is give you a general overview of the workflow for tracking an object in 3D Equalizer. So this isn't going to be a tutorial on how 3D Equalizer actually works and how to use it. So if we play through our footage, you can see the camera's already been solved, these points. It was a pretty straightforward solve actually. It's shot with a Blackmagic camera, 22mm focal length, and it's just a simple dolly movement. And the resolution's 4K, so there's plenty of data to work with to solve the camera. So the first thing you need to do in object, when tracking an object, is to create a new point group. So this is the point group that's used to solve our camera. This new point group we can rename object P group, and we want to make sure that the point group type is set to object, because if it's set to camera, obviously the software is going to try and solve our camera movement, not the movement of our actor's arm. Okay, so making sure that this point group is active, we can start to look at placing some points. So the markers on the object we're trying to track are really used to give positions for us to place points, like you can see in the camera solve. So we can start by control clicking to place a point. I'll start here. The markers are color coded to kind of make your life a bit easier as in tracking the shot. And I think we'll start with a marker track. So if we set the tracking mode to marker, make sure enhanced tracking is turned on. I don't really know why it's not by default, because it nearly always gives you a kind of better solve and a better track for a point. And as I said, because these points, these markers are color coded, we can take advantage of 3D Equalizer's great image controls. So I just want to reset all of those, make sure image controls is enabled, and we're going to look at the chroma key. So this is used to pick out certain colors and to isolate them from the kind of background that they're on, and it just makes tracking them sometimes a lot easier. So if we click pick and then just start to, on frame 1, pick some of the colors of our marker. So that seems to be quite a good selection. And then what I like to do is just move forward a few frames, because you can see that we're starting to, as the frame range moves across, we're losing a lot of that color information on that marker as the light changes the color of the marker. So we just pick some more colors. Okay, again move forward a few more frames, that's much better. There we start to lose a bit of information on the marker, and pick some more of that. You need to be a bit careful when using the chroma key, because if you pick too much then you know it kind of makes it useless, because you end up kind of selecting a massive range of colors and not isolating the color that you actually want to. So just pick a few more of that. Another thing we can do if we go to the image controls window is just bump up the range, and you can see what I mean. As we bring the range up, we're isolating, we're highlighting more of the colors in the background. But I think the contrast between the black on the arm and this marker is quite good. Awesome. The shortcut for bringing up your image controls is actually Alt 7. One thing I like to do when I'm using chroma key is actually using some blurring, and I find that it just makes it smoothens out the edges and gives a bit of a better track. Okay, let's make the search area a bit smaller. Okay, now, so the shortcut for gauging our marker to position it in the center is X. So if we hit X a few times, making sure enhanced tracking's on, we can begin to track this marker. Okay, that's good. I know you can see that around frame 43 we start to lose a bit of the colour at the left hand side of the marker, which is causing it to jump across. So what we can do is we can go about there, pick some more of those colours, bring back the time slider, re-gauge our marker and track again. So one of the issues I had in tracking this shot was the motion blur, and you get a lot of it around frame 50 to 60. You can see that you've pretty much completely lost any detail in that marker. So if we bring it back, pick some more colours, go back to where we start to lose our point, re-gauge, maybe pick a few bit more, re-gauge the marker. I mean, it's jumping quite a lot there because we've lost a lot of the shape that we originally had at frame 1. It's really square, and now the motion blur's caused it to turn more kind of rectangular and much smaller. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to end that point there to save time. You can bring this range slider to the end of the point, making sure that center 2D is on to keep our point in the center of our screen, and just play through just to see how it tracks. Again, I'm not going to go through tracking every point and every marker on this object, because that would take quite a long time. I just want to give you a general idea of the workflow behind tracking objects and markers on objects. So now we've tracked this point, one thing you might notice is that it's not until about frame 60, 63 that the markers on the other side of the object actually become visible at all. So one thing you might want to do is do a backwards track, which allows us to track the point from the end of the frame range instead of going from the beginning of the frame range. So the same way we did it before, you want to control click to add a point. This time I'm going to try a pattern track, and again making sure that enhanced tracking switched on. We can select our pattern, get as much detail as we can. You don't want to make your pattern too big, because otherwise it can take quite a long time to track, and there's plenty of points that you can put on here. So make sure that it's centered. Maybe we can bring up our image controls, reset, and add a bit of contrast. Okay, that will do. So, like before, we can gauge our pattern using the X key, and now we can begin to track the point. I forgot to mention that making sure that the direction is set to backward because if it's set to forward then and you're at the end of the frame range, then 3D Equalizer gets a bit confused and starts putting keyframes in the wrong place. So just make sure that direction is set to backward only if you're looking to track a point from the end of the frame range. Okay, so that seems to be going quite well. Staying in position. If we zoom in a bit, we can see that that's staying put. One of the great things about tracking with 4K is that you're given so much more information and deviation, pixel deviation that you get in 4K when you actually take it into Maya and you render out half that resolution. Pixel deviation is actually a lot smaller than what it might seem because the resolution's so high. So this point seems to be tracking quite well. Again, it's going quite slowly just because there is so much pixel information that it's trying to capture in that pattern. Okay, and then as you can see, we get that motion blur. Pattern tracking, 3D Equalizer does deal with it quite well, and these shapes elongating, it does work it out pretty well, so it makes your life a lot easier. So we're starting to lose our pattern there, so we take it back, rotate, make sure we're capturing all the data of those markers, and track again. Okay, awesome. So I'll call that point ended there. Again, just because tracking through the whole frame range is going to take a pretty long time. We'll bring the range slider up to there and just play through. We can see the point stays put. So I'm going to jump ahead now. I've already solved this object, so I'm going to jump ahead to a save file where I've actually got all the points in position so that we can look at using some reference images to improve our solve. Okay, so we make sure we are on our object P group, point group, and as you can see from our footage, I've put the points that I've tracked into separate point groups just to make the organization of the track a bit better. 4 corresponds to, or say 3 group corresponds to side 3 of the object, and 4 corresponds to side 4 of the object. You can't really see it, but that says 4 there. And again, it's just to improve the organization of the scene a bit better. Okay, so you can see that the points here are all in position. One of the difficulties I had was when this motion blur kicks in is the overlap between the points on side 3 and the points on side 4. There wasn't a lot of information on that overlap when you can see both sides, which made it slightly difficult to solve the 3D points on the object. But using the image controls and bringing out some contrast, you can get a bit more data in the area where there's a lot of motion blur. So you can see all these points have been tracked, and on that side as well. Again, I didn't need to track every single marker because there's more than enough data there on these points. It's just to give us a kind of area where in lineup in Maya it does make your life easier. Okay, so if we solved this now using Alt-C, you can see that 3D equalizer has tried to work out the position of the object based on the points that we've tracked. Okay. Now, 0.52 deviation on that is okay, but one thing that when your object tracking is quite important and will help you to get a much better solve is the use of reference images. So you can see here our camera, our sequence camera is the actual Blackmagic camera we used to film. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new reference camera, and because I know that we have two reference images that we're going to use, I'm going to add another reference camera, and on ref 17 if we make it active, and now we can browse to our reference image. Reference images, sequence view, make sure that's off, just so that it shows you each individual file. So ARM003, and the next reference image if we browse to ARM004. Okay, so straight away you can see we're getting a warning, and this is going to tell me that for the lens that this is associated with this reference image, there is more than one aspect ratio. Obviously, because our sequence camera, which was actually shot with the Blackmagic, is 4K, and these are 5184 by 3456, so it's a different aspect ratio, and that's because these pictures weren't shot with the Blackmagic. These were actually shot with a Canon 7D. So what we can do is we can add a new lens to associate with these reference images we have. So if we right click, add new lens, double click on that lens, and now we can begin to edit it. So when you're taking reference images, one of the important things to do is just write down the details of the camera, the focal length that was used, the make, the model, and from that you can find out the film back width and height, and also from that film aspect, because sometimes the metadata on the image that you use isn't always as reliable. So just make sure when you take the image that you record all the details of the camera. Okay, so if we double click on the lens, we have that information here. So the reference camera that's used, Canon 7D, and it was an 18mm fixed focal length and a sensor size of 22.3mm by 14.9. So we can name this Canon 7D underscore 18mm, and now we can put in those film back settings, 22.3 by 14.9. Okay, so that is a film aspect of 1.5. So we're also getting a pixel aspect of 1.5 because this still hasn't been associated with these images. So we'll go ahead and do that. Select these two reference images, modify, lens, Canon 7D, and that warning message has disappeared. Now if we go back to our Canon 7D, can see that the pixel aspect has gone to 1. Okay, so now what we need to do is associate the points on the object that we've tracked with the markers in our reference images. And from this, based on the focal length and other parameters, 3D Equalizer works out the relationship of the points that you've tracked in 3D space. Sometimes using more reference images than you actually need can make your solve worse. And as I mentioned earlier, the more markers you have, the more difficult it is to pick the correct corresponding markers on each reference image. And especially if the image is being rotated or different orientation, you might accidentally pick the wrong marker between these different images, and that can also mess up your solve. So if we go to R4, so that is the front of the object, and we can see 0.09 is the green point at the end of the object. So if we go through to our first reference image, we pick 0.09, it's a marker, so we want to just click to place the point on the image, and then we can gauge that, although it's jumping quite a bit. So we can bring in our image controls. Sometimes they disappear off screen. Pick our image controls and pick some of that green. Now we can gauge the marker a bit better. Now if we hit the right key to jump forward to the next frame, we can see that the point is now up here. So if we just click again, switch on our image controls, reset, pick, okay, and now gauge to get the center of that marker. Awesome. Okay. Now let's look at the cross point up there, which is 0.11. So if we do the same thing, I want to get our 0.11, position it in the center of that cross, central as we can get it. Go to the next frame and do the same thing here. Okay. Now, let's look at side 3. So I'm not going to go through and position all of these points because that might take quite a while, but just to give you the idea of how you would do it. So let's pick 0.01. Which is this point up here. Switch on our image controls, select that, and then gauge the marker. Go to our next image, position it again, switch on our image controls, reset, and gauge it again. Okay, perfect. Now I'll do one more. Select this blue point, which is 0.6. So select 0.6, position it, reset our image controls, and now select the blue so that we can gauge the point in the center of the marker. Move to the next frame. This is quite a laborious task, but it makes your solve a lot of the time much better. Make sure reset our image controls. Okay, now we can gauge it just to get the center of the marker again. So really you'd go through all these points and position them in their corresponding positions in the reference images. I've done that already, so we can jump ahead to Captain America 03. And so what you end up with is all of your points with keyframes on the reference images in the right places. And from this, as you can see, I've placed all of the points like that, and on the next reference image as well. So from here, we can do another solve. Use the result. And then if we use F6 to hop into our 3D orientation mode, you can see that the shape of the points now match up to the square or rectangular shape of the object on our actor's arm. And the movement is pretty smooth. We've got a bit of jumping in there, but that's just fine-tuning points if we had more time. Okay, so that looks good. Another thing that I've done is if we hop into our reference images, you can see this image, arm distance 002. And what that is it provides a reference for the distance between these two markers, which you can then, so that's say 6 centimeters, you can plug in that distance to the points to give 3D Equalizer a kind of idea of the scale of the scene. Okay, so from here we've got our points tracked in 3D space, and we've got our camera solved. We can head into Maya. So the way to do this, the workflow for undistorting the footage, this has already been done because the camera's already been solved. But from your camera solve, you can work out the distortion of the images, and you can take these into Nuke by exporting a Nuke lens distortion node, and then you can use that node to undistort your footage for use in Maya. But that's already been done. Oh, and also you can use Warp 4, which is 3D Equalizer's own undistortion software or application. So what we're going to do is we're going to export this project to use in Maya. So if we go export project Maya, and we're going to get a window. This hide reference frames, make sure that's checked, because otherwise it will export your reference images into Maya as separate cameras, and we don't want that. We only want our sequence camera, or our camera that has our footage in. So export file, and this is going to just provide us with a Mel script. So I've already exported that, so we can hop into Maya. Okay, so once we are in Maya and we have imported our track script into the scene, you can see that our 3D points have appeared, and in our outliner you can see that we have 4 image planes, actually, because I forgot to turn off hide reference frames when exporting from 3D Equalizer. so we can also get rid of these other cameras. So if we look through our sequence cam and delete this image plane and just load a new one, we can load up our undistorted footage. Tell Maya that we're using an image sequence, and because we're not starting at frame 1, we're actually starting at frame 1370, we set the frame offset to 1369. Okay, so I've jumped ahead to a scene file where I've already aligned some geometry with the object on our actor's sleeve. If I play it through, you can see that on the first frame it's aligned to the sleeve. So what we need to do now is actually parent this object to one of our 3D points so that the 3D geometry matches the movement of the object on the actor's arm. So if we select a point or the parent and then the geometry, the child, go to constrain, parent constraint, and we'll just look at the options so that we can reset them. Okay, and now we're going to add that constraint. So now you can see that if I switch back to smooth shaded mode, the object, the geometry really matches and follows the movement that we tracked in 3D Equalizer. So this might take a while trying to line up the object exactly, but using the 3D points we've tracked to line it up really makes things a lot easier. So now our shield, I've already aligned it, but we still need to constrain our shield to the sleeve geometry. So again, like we did before, what we want to do is we want to select our parent, which is the sleeve, and then our shield group. We go back to constrain. We know we're going to use the same settings as we did before, so we can just click there without going to the settings. Now this shield should follow the same movement and rotation of our sleeve geometry. So maximize that view. As you can see, although it's a bit jittery at the start, the shield follows the movement of the sleeve underneath. So, I mean, in terms of actually lining up, that was a pretty basic overview of how it's done. Lining up objects can take quite a while, and so I wasn't going to go through it in this tutorial because we'd be here for quite a lot longer. But that's the general workflow for placing an object in a scene, object tracking. I hope that it's useful to you. I think object tracking is definitely a step up from basic camera tracking in 3D Equalizer. But once you learn how to do it, you learn how to use 3D Equalizer so much more, and it's pretty straightforward once you get your head around it. There's a few things that you do slightly differently, but actually the general process for tracking points is exactly the same. And yeah, so that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and hopefully we'll see you soon.